Welcome to another episode of the Daily Wisdom Words podcast, where each week we talk to folks who have stories, advice, and life hacks, all of which take you one step closer to that feeling of hope. I'm your co-host, Neil Trivedi.
And I'm your co-host, Rini O'Day. Welcome.
Today we're proud to welcome ADHD coach Daniela, and I hope I get this right. Is it Marinova? Did I say that right?
I think that's good enough, yeah.
That's good enough. it changes. It changes to whoever says it. No, it's a great last name. So, hi, Daniela. Yeah.
How are you doing?
Hey, gorgeous.
Hello, I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Nice to have you on the
Great.
show.
It's so good to have you on. Yeah. We should point out to our viewers that you are in the UK, so it took a little bit of time adjusting, and Google, I found out, can lie on two different sites, can say two different things when it comes to the difference in time zones. Because
Really? The internet lies? Really?
Yeah, I know. It's shocking, right?
Oh,
especially when time zones change. That's like the most tricky part.
Yeah. If I could live in any other country, I would live in the UK. I would.
Oh, really? How come?
I just love I just love it. I think it's
free
a beautiful
healthcare
place. Yeah. Free healthcare. Yeah. And let me tell you, before we, get into your background a bit, can you tell us what ADHD is clinically? Yes.
Yeah, so of course, ADHD is neurodevelopmental condition. This is like the scientific definition of it, meaning that it's genetic. It's basically characterized by symptoms of inattentiveness, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. So people can have like different presentations of ADHD. It could either be mainly hyperactive and impulsive, or inattentive, or the third one, which is the combined presentation of both, where you would see prevalence of like each types of symptoms. But I think that doesn't really say a lot to people when they hear the definition of ADHD, especially people that are not really familiar with the disorder. So like a different way to explain it figuratively is, if you, for example, if you've seen the film Pirates of the Caribbean, and that Jack Sparrow has this compass, right? And in this compass basically is never pointing towards north, right? So because it's not about pointing in that direction. The compass is quite special, and it usually points towards, always points towards the direction of the thing that you want most. So ADHD and navigating your attention is quite similar. So your brain will try to push you towards the thing that you want most, which doesn't necessarily represent the thing that you're trying to concentrate on. So it can be very tricky for people to exercise their executive functioning in the right way, to tackle the tasks that they want to get done, to prioritize well, to make a plan and execute the plan. So things like that come with more difficulty for them. It doesn't mean that they don't have that they have lack of attention, but it's more about how you're able to navigate this attention.
Sure.
And I'm so glad you say that, because like most people, including myself as a layman, we all assume, it means short attention span, right? Like the layman stereotypical definition always says, it's when you can't concentrate on one thing. But so I'm so glad you covered that up, and I'm sure we'll be like, you'll be bursting other myths too along the way of this interview. But what made you want to be a coach in this particular area, in this particular subject?
So one of the initial reasons was because I feel very happy to be surrounded by a lot of people in my life that have been diagnosed with ADHD or have a lot of ADHD traits, even if they don't have a formal diagnosis. And secondly, I think being a coach for neurodivergent people is not necessarily a thing that you come across often, which can make a lot of people that have some sort of neurodivergency feel misunderstood, or say that the practices that are recommended don't necessarily work for them. And I think in that sense, it's useful to have more people like myself who are more familiar with the different types of brain wiring, so that they can also educate and spread awareness for people that, you know, have these differences.
Yeah, sure. And that's why you're the perfect guest, because that's one goal of this podcast is. Yeah, we always say this: is to create awareness and hope of mental health issues and anything to do with mental health. So that's why we love having people. Really, I'm going to jump around a little bit because you said something that really caught my attention. You said,
I'm just going to sit back and listen to this woman.
You talked about like people who may misunderstand, and we even covered it in your first answer when we were talking about how. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about ADHD for those who are not as well informed as you or another coach might be?
I guess one of the biggest ones that I've come across is ADHD. Well, adults outgrow ADHD. And while that can be the case sometimes, it's not that you outgrow it, but more like some people are lucky enough to, for example, get the right treatment early on, the right intervention, to be able to handle the symptoms in a very adequate manner. But it's a genetic condition, so you don't just grow out of it, even though a lot of doctors have.
Is it completely genetic, or can people develop it over?
So you can't really develop it, but it's more like, say, if your parents have it, or if there's history of ADHD in your family, it is far more likely that you can
have it.
That type of neurodivergent brain. It's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, especially if your parent has been diagnosed and has learned how to manage it, they can have really good awareness in order to help the child to manage it better. And not just to manage it, but just mainly to show understanding to the child in their early years, instead of labeling it as lazy or incompetent or just somebody that doesn't want to apply themselves. Or for instance, compare it to like siblings.
Well, we hear about it a lot in like kindergarten when kids start school. Okay. So that is, I understand that is completely genetic. But when an adult, is it just not seen until their adult years and then it starts manifesting?
Yeah, so this is why some people get diagnosed later on, especially that's the case in women. So usually when there's a big transition in your life, so for example, you're moving from high school to college, from college to work life, from work life to being a parent, these are quite strong transition times where your responsibilities and your lifestyle completely change. So that's when ADHD symptomology can become like strong to the extent that it really interferes with your functioning. It makes you feel burnt out. It makes you feel like you can never get on top of things. Like no matter how much effort you're putting, you're always falling short. So these are usually key moments where people start noticing their ADHD symptoms and seek some sort of explanation, which usually comes through sharing these symptoms with your doctor and, you know, hoping that they are going to refer you for an assessment.
Absolutely.
Right.
Hey everyone, I'm Neil Trevetti. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like listening to your podcasts while you drive, go jogging, cook, and just go about your day? Subscribe and listen to us on platforms like Anchor, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Have you subscribed?
Yeah. When you mentioned assessment, right? And you also mentioned that how it getting more obvious when it gets older. And as we all know, right, when we do get older, generally many of our focus starts to waver a little on small things. You forget where you put your keys, or like, oh, I just had it. It's just under my nose. So how does a person, especially as they're getting older, differentiate between ADHD and just, okay, this is just me getting older, those general tendencies of aging, and ADHD?
So there's two things that you would want to be paying attention to. So these symptoms, they need to be pervasive and they need to be persistent, okay? They don't just disappear like that. And the pervasiveness is to an extent that it really, really interferes with your day-to-day life. And it's not just like one day, you do it and then like after that you don't do it for a whole week. Like it's usually quite consistent that you would be noticing these symptoms, especially when you don't have the strategies to like handle to manage your symptoms in that way. And it's not necessarily that with the older someone gets, the more symptoms they're going to experience, but it's more that in early years, it can be missed out because, for example, the person might have had really good education and their parents could have been like quite tuned in, making sure that the kid is following the like a plan for the day, making sure that they organize everything the kid is doing. And then once the kid becomes, the teenager or young adult becomes more independent, say when they move to college, and there's instantly expected, and it's instantly expected of them to be able to organize their own time and know how to manage their responsibilities, that's when you start seeing it. Or for example, if it's like college to work life where you need even more independence, or when you become a parent, for example, when you now have to take responsibility not just for yourself but for somebody else.
So true. So what you're saying, in a sense, not exactly maybe, but in a sense, when we're children, right, it's that routine and rules and regulation of the house that the parents said that might sort of mask our attention because it's a rule, got to go to bed by 9:00 or got to do our homework by this time. So it may mask our attention wavering because we're made to do it. But as we get older and independent and we don't have that kind of regimentation, it may come out even. That's what basically you're saying.
Exactly what you're saying.
Interesting.
And also hang on, I had a train of thought. And so for example, in girls, so for kids that are between the ages of 4 and 17 in the US, boys get diagnosed twice as much as girls. And it's not necessarily that the prevalence in boys is higher, but it's because the way the symptoms manifest in boys is more obvious than to what they manifest like in girls. So for example, girls might appear a little bit more spacey in class, not really paying attention, like playing with their hair, staring at the window, whereas with boys it can be more disruptive, which then makes the teacher, since it's disrupting the lesson, pay more attention to that kid and trying to come up with a way to stop the kid disrupting the class. And that would be, okay, let's talk to the school psychologist, and now this person is a little bit more informed, and then they can refer them for an assessment for whatever it might be that they think the child has. So, whereas with girls, it might get a little bit more missed out because the hyperactivity might not be as intense.
That is so true. I had 3 children go through school. I had 3. 2 were boys and 1 was a girl. And when you're in class, especially like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, boys are so much more hyperactive, like they will stand at their desk instead of sit, and they will, fidget with the papers and stuff like that. And, they would be sent to the school psychologist or to a psychologist, whatever, and get diagnosed with ADHD. More often than girls.
I was going to say the gender stereotype also plays a role there because we say boys will be boys, so we kind of accept that sort of behavior.
That's
coming
interesting.
from,
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good point. Yeah.
So like for girls, when they're growing up, they might be thinking they have to overcompensate to hold in that hyperactivity inside them because it's so looked down upon for them to express different emotions and to be disruptive. You know, it's not ladylike. It's not what a girl does.
Yeah. Can it ever happen that because of that suppression in their adult years, it might come out more? So like, because like you said, when they're younger, they're taught, okay, that's not very ladylike. Now you're a girl, you have to be polite. You can't act out like this. And do you ever, like, is that possible to have it come out then more obviously in later years as an adult, especially for females?
I'm not exactly sure, but it can be like a big duality inside your mind. You know, you're fighting a lot to mask those types of behaviors which seem unacceptable, but you're not coping with the symptoms in a healthy way because it's not like you're paying attention to your sleep, your nutrition, and stuff like that.
Can you talk about that? About, you know, coping with your symptoms, what the symptoms are, and how to cope with that. I'm sorry, Neil, if I stepped on your question.
No, go ahead. That's a good, No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So like coping, well, I guess it's important to make the distinction between coping with a symptom in a healthy way than masking a symptom. So this is a question that usually comes up quite a lot in the ADHD Instagram community. You know, what is it? Right. What does masking mean? Of masking your ADHD, masking your neurodivergency? I guess a good way to describe it would be the masking is when you do an activity that sort of disadvantages you, but is hiding the symptom. So, for example, say that you had to hydrate yourself throughout the day, right? So you wanted to bring, like, a way to hydrate yourself is carrying a bottle of water with you, okay? But what would happen, like, say you're quite forgetful and you think, you know, you're going to lose it, for example. You lose things very often. So you think you will lose the bottle. So a way of masking the symptom of losing your water bottle would be, well, I might as well just not bring it with me. So you're like dehydrated the whole day. So this is you masking it. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas coping with the symptom, let's see, might look like, okay, well, I'm going to make sure that I carry it in my bag and I carry it, say, in my car. So at least when I'm traveling on the way, I know that in the car I've got a water bottle. Or for example, I might have one water bottle in the car, one at my workplace, and one in my bag. So I don't, even if I lose one, at least I know in the other place I've got one to drink from. Okay? Yeah. Or let's say in terms of commitment, ADHD people can sometimes, you know, can often forget appointments they've scheduled. So say we were doing this podcast and say I had ADHD, right? And I might think to myself, well, I'm not going to do any podcasts because I don't want to have to handle the embarrassment in case I forget about it or I think of the wrong date and I turn up at the wrong time. So in that way, I'm just going to turn all podcast invitations from now on. This is not a great way of coping with the symptom.
No.
You might instead want to say to your friend, can you remind me that on this day I've got a podcast? Or I might send you a request to remind me an hour before, or I might put it in a calendar, whatever it is.
Wow.
I love that example. Yeah. It's not too many people talk about that, like, you know, finding that solution, especially when it comes to ADHD. Like one thing I know I do, like the night before I go to sleep is I write down all my activities for the next day, just because I'm so afraid that I'm going to forget. And then I have it on the home screen of my phone. So when I wake up, and of course, in the 21st century, all of us, what's the first thing we do? Check our phones, right? So I'll see that as soon as I turn on my phone, that's the first thing I'll see. But then it sets in like, okay, I have to do almost like a reminder, like you said, like not having that, just putting a Band-Aid over it and saying, forget about it. Trying to, that's
so weird. Because the first thing I see on my phone when I wake up in the morning, it says, take a nap. Go back to sleep. Do you find that children with ADHD also have anxiety and depression? Can that be masked in there?
Yeah, for sure. 100%. So like usually people that have untreated ADHD, or even if it's treated, they're 50% more likely to have some sort of a comorbidity with another personality or mood disorder. Depression and anxiety, I think, is the most common one. Or also comorbidity with other neurodivergency. For example, being somewhere on the autistic spectrum, having dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, they kind of decide that they were going to go hand in hand like friends, and they just clump in one person's brain. Right? But it's not like the ADHD causes anxiety or it's not like the depression causes ADHD, but sometimes untreated ADHD can cause more anxiety, depression symptoms. One of the most important takeaways from being in therapy is learning that it's to basically a skill to validate your own emotions, that you have the right to experience emotions, you have the right to share what you feel, and there's nothing wrong with you for feeling a particular way. And just like the skill of being able to identify what that emotion is, where it's located in your body, what is the effect that it has, how do you voice it out to other people, how do you ask for your needs to be met, and that it's completely okay for you to ask for your needs to be met. This is what I think, in my opinion, one of the most important skills to learn by being in therapy. And a lot of people, I think, believe that for you to go to therapy or to try coaching or any sort of intervention, things have to be bad first. And that's not coaching the case.
Is great.
Yeah, that's why we need more people like you in these, especially specific areas like ADHD, because we see a lot of life coaching, and that's great. Don't get me wrong. I'm thankful there are life coaches and those are there, but it certainly helps when people like you focus on that, like you mentioned earlier, that one specific area where people might feel, is there no hope? Is there no help for me, like for my symptoms? And so that's why I think like what you do and others like you is so good.
And start kids young. And
start to recognize
and get it in schools.
100%. If you have these sorts of interventions in schools, I think it would be far more likely for young people to get diagnosed early and to be treated as early as possible, which would give them more time to learn these skills as they're transitioning through important stages in their life.
What are some daily tips, tricks that people can do to cope with ADHD?
So I think the very first thing that when you get your diagnosis should be trying to go through the grieving process and giving yourself time to accept that your brain is wired differently and there's nothing you can do about changing it, and you don't have to change it. The ADHD brain, the different neurodiverse brain, they have their advantages, historically, evolutionary. There are skills that you have, strengths that you have that other people might not. You don't need to be changing your brain because there's nothing wrong with you. Now, once you have spent time understanding this and really internalizing it, accepting yourself for who you really are and how your brain really is, then you can start placing your attention, directing your attention towards things that are within your control, like how you tailor your environment so that it's supporting your brain in this process. So the process of healing in the beginning doesn't start with, I'm going to be the best version of myself, I'm going to have the best schedule, the best planner. It starts with thinking, what is the worst version of myself? How can I love that? How can I accept that? Okay. When you forget birthdays and when you forget to call that friend or whatever, you know, being able to go through the process of forgiving yourself and really understand where those behaviors are coming from. Like, there's just so much shame and frustration that is linked to having ADHD. And usually this is like me as someone who's started by, you know, like having been in relationships with people with ADHD, you realize that in the beginning it's really easy to take things personally, but often you forget that people that have portrayed that behavior, the person with ADHD, they struggle a lot more. They are a lot more frustrated with themselves than you're with them, because there is a lot of shame of like forgetting where to go, what time to go, like missing deadlines and underperforming, not meeting other people's expectations. So before you look into any hacks and tricks and whatever, go through that process of accepting your brain. This is like rule number one. Yeah.
And love yourself. Love yourself for who you are, and then, you know, learn how to cope with that.
Yeah.
You know,
then
learn how to.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not as easy to, you know, do it as it is to say it. And then I would say the next thing is to get your expectations straight and to know that even people that are quote unquote neurotypical, they also experience certain symptoms. They also forget. They also, you know, can be hyperactive at times. Okay, so the reason I'm saying this is not to invalidate the fact that you were experiencing these symptoms as a person with ADHD, but to say that no matter even how much you tailor your environment, it is also sometimes the case that these things will happen. You will miss deadlines, you'll miss whatever it is, okay? So getting that expectation straight, that this thing is known as perfection doesn't really exist. And then thinking to yourself, it's better to make a little bit of progress than to focus on perfecting yourself. You know, think about, I don't know, performing at 70% and 100%. Like, don't have such high expectations of yourself on a day-to-day basis, because it's very stressful. The more stress there is in your body, the less you'll be able to actually implement the changes.
Exactly. Stress in the body is, you know, not a good thing. It's not a good thing at all. And,
terrible.
I mean, you have to learn to cope with that, you know? And there are a lot of things out there that can help you cope with stress. Meditation, for one, you know,
meditation is a great thing. So a lot of times meditation, when people hear meditation, they just imagine someone sat down, not thinking about anything, you know, listening to some Zen music and not having any thoughts. Doesn't have to be that way. Meditation, you can think of it as a state in which you are able to really concentrate on one thing at a time. It doesn't mean you have to stop thinking about everything. It can actually be placing your focus on one thing. So even if it is going out for a walk, and while you're walking, you might be counting your steps, or you might be counting the steps you need to take one breath in, the steps you need to take to exhale, and then again and again, you know, focusing on this thing. So this is like how to do active meditation.
Is it a little bit like mindfulness?
It is mindfulness, right? Paying attention as you're doing something, you know, being able to concentrate on that activity.
And you know what else is another form of meditation, and it doesn't have to be Zen, but music.
It can also, it's also shown that music without lyrics can actually be beneficial for people with ADHD, increasing their concentration levels. So it's something that that people can try out. It's not going to work for everyone, but it will work for some people. When you add lyrics, sometimes that can take your attention away because you're starting to sing to it. Right, and it's now more difficult to focus.
Or they even say, right, that don't listen to, if you're going to try that technique to see if is it true that they say don't listen to an instrumental version of a song that has lyrics, because then in your head,
then you're singing it anyway.
Yeah, that happens to me. But people with ADHD can actually concentrate for hours and hours at a time. You know, when they hyperfixate on something, they're gonna forget about eating, about drinking water, about going to the toilet, about other people existing. In fact, it's a bit like hyperfixation on one thing, right? But then like regulating this attention and knowing when to start and stop, well, that's now tricky.
And Daniela, what is the most important thing people need to do in their life? Sleep.
Okay.
Recharge our batteries, right? We gotta do that.
Sleep.
But
sleep.
There's I did want to ask, I was curious about this is something that I personally wondered, but it may not even be that important. But when I was growing up and I used to hear the term ADD, right? Before ADHD, when did it change? Like, when did we discover about the hyperactivity, like you said? Because like I said, when I was younger, I always heard ADD. And then slowly as I grew up and more research came and the H was added. So what was, when was that added? And what was can you explain hyperactivity, just that portion of it in a little bit more detail?
It's a good question.
The hyperactivity will basically it's also kind of related to impulsivity. Okay, so not being able to control your impulses. So for example, that could be physical activity, or it could be things like impulsive shopping, impulsive buying, gambling, addictive behaviors, kind of also going 100% all in, black or white thinking. That's the type of hyperactivity and impulsivity. When it came, I can't give you like the exact date or time, but I know that as the DSM has like
she's
progressed,
way too young for that.
Currently it's ADHD, which includes the hyperactivity. You could have different presentations of ADHD. So when you hear ADD nowadays, usually that would refer to the presentation of ADHD with inattention, not with the hyperactivity, but mainly inattention.
Anyway, Daniela, you are a joy. This
was a joy.
This was such a great show.
Yeah, we went into tips and we went into stuff that you can implement in your life. And the next step would be, folks, if you're listening, is to contact people like Daniela and hire them as
contact
coaches.
Daniela.
After, yes. So with that
just
said,
contact Daniela. There's nobody else.
Yeah, you don't even need the other two.
The guy next door, forget it.
Don't go there. So with that said, where can people find you? And tell us about your practice. Like, where can people find you, your website, and all that good stuff?
Oh, well, talking about procrastinating, like I have been procrastinating on fixing my website for I think about 4 months now, because I took it down in February and I was like, I'm just going to start rebranding it and incorporating certain changes. I don't know how much of that's happening at the moment. But anyway, mainly... That
makes all of us, by the way.
Mainly I'm on Instagram. And my Instagram name is spaceforcoaching_ADHD. One thing I just want to remind people, by the way, if you were to ever try and go into therapy or coaching for managing your ADHD symptoms, think of those practices a bit like they're a bit like dating. You might take a few tries with a few different people to find that chemistry, to find who you can really trust and who you can really talk to and you feel encouraged by and empowered by. So if it fails the first few times, there is nothing wrong with you. It just might be that the relationship between the coach and chemistry. The client isn't the best, right?
Yeah, I had a therapist once that we were on different planets.
Yeah,
and I just
that's fine.
Yeah, no, this isn't gonna work, so you can go for someone else. She knew it too when I stopped coming.
It's important, because I know that a lot of people can get discouraged and they might think, oh, well, I'm uncoachable or whatever.
No one's uncoachable. No one, especially if you have someone like you. Like they're gonna get out there and they're gonna do what they need to do. So but anyway, like I said, thank you. You've been a joy. This is a great show. I hope everyone that feels like they have ADHD, get someone in your life that knows, that will help you. Therapist, coach, whatever. Especially do it.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
We're going to come visit you in the UK, okay?
Yeah, you're always welcome.
Okay, sweetie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Daniela, for coming on the show.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at all the links listed in the description. Don't forget to hit like on this video and subscribe to this channel so you never miss an episode. Thank you, everyone, once again, and we will see you right here next week at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.